Welcome to this podcast from Rolling Roads Baptist Church of Greensboro, North Carolina. You're invited to join with us as we are growing towards Christ. The following is a message from a recent Sunday morning worship service.
Well, our Bible study podcast for this week begins a brand new quarterly Bible Studies for Life personal study guide for the fall, F-A-L-L, fall of 2023. Amazing, isn't it? And so it looks like a whole bunch of lessons taking us all the way up to Thanksgiving. After Thanksgiving, can you believe it will be Thanksgiving very soon? Anyway, our first lesson, of course, is for September 3rd. And session 1 is developing strong convictions, or develop strong convictions, because the overall theme in the whole book is staying true in a world far from God. And if you looked at the quarterly, they're talking about at the introduction, at the beginning of the welcome page, all kinds of new looks and designs, and then they also are saying that it's available as an ebook. If you don't have the quarterly, you can order a copy at lifeway.com/BSFL ebook. If you want to get a copy of it, you can do it that way. And I think, of course, I believe you. I don't think it's free. So the introduction, staying true in a world far from God, talking about Daniel and his place in Babylon, that our first thought concerning Daniel is likely of the king throwing him in the lion's den as we're growing up. And this highlights the world's antagonism toward the things of God and his followers. The conflict has existed since Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden and continues to this day. What do you think? Do you believe the world is far from God? And the division between the world's standards and God's is not a thin line in the sand. Today it is a vast chasm. The differences are seemingly becoming greater at an ever increasingly rapid rate. And so this is one thing that they want us to consider. And our photo here is a picture of New York's Times Square, where we were just there in June. But they're going to take us through some lessons here highlighting Daniel. So session 1, develop strong convictions. The main point is our convictions, not our circumstances, define who we are. What do you think about that? I just saw an interview with a person from 25 or so years ago, 30 years ago, and that person was essentially the same person then as they are today, at least as they appear in public, believing many of the same things, using the same kind of logic, the same reasoning, exhibiting the same kind of character. So, do we change with the circumstances as the years go by, or do we remain true to who we know we are and who God has created us to be? Or as Paul said, is he trying to please men, or is he trying to please God? Is it our convictions that define who we are, or is it the circumstances around us? Focal passages, Daniel chapter 1, 3 through 13, and 18 through 19, 18 and 19. And so they ask us the question, when have you experienced cultural shock? And they talk about Eddie Munster, when the stairs opened like the hood of a car, and Spot would appear, usually breathing fire. That pet dragon scared this kid to death. Mere technicalities kept him from owning a dragon. And then he says little jokes about that. But the Munsters, hapless monsters who faced challenges as they lived in a world vastly different from what they had previously known in Transylvania. And if you think about it, This is true of several TV shows, the writer points out. Several 1960s TV shows depicted people living in an unfamiliar place. Gilligan's Island, Lost in Space, The Beverly Hillbillies, The Munsters. Sometimes we take a look at our world today and we say to ourselves, this is not the world I've known. Something is vastly wrong here. And there's an old song, Strangers in a Strange Land. Well, the Old Testament prophet Daniel was transported into a foreign and ungodly place, and he is an example for us to learn from. So our convictions, not our circumstances, define who we are. Daniel 1, beginning at verse 3. The king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the Israelites from the royal family and from the nobility, young men without any physical defect, good-looking, suitable for instruction in all wisdom, knowledgeable, perceptive, and capable of serving in the king's palace. He was to teach them the Chaldean language and literature. The king assigned them daily provisions from the royal food and from the wine that he drank. They were to be trained for 3 years, and at the end of that time, they were to attend the king. Among them, from the Judahites, were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief eunuch gave them names. He gave the name Belteshazzar to Daniel, Shadrach to Hananiah, Meshach to Mishael, and Abednego to Azariah. Well, I'm going to try to read through this 2-column format here, which is kind of tricking me up because there's something about the font that makes me not be able to find my place as well as I could before. Maybe that's the same with you, but I got to get used to this. I feel like the font is different, but I can't see as well, so I have to be careful. So he's talking about first the best and the brightest. You can see here where the young people were picked from the noble families and in both appearance and their heritage, and I guess we would, in Hollywood they would call that, tried to get people from good stock, people from good families, as Higgins would say. People from this social strata. And so they're getting the finest education that they're going to get. And it looks like, though, that the king, Nebuchadnezzar, is not thinking about the religious foundation that they have. Daniel and his friends are Hebrews. They had grown up under the influence of Judah's King Josiah. And we remember all about him. The reign that was marked by the rediscovering of the law, isn't it in here? Renewing the covenant and God's word being reestablished. Anyway, Daniel and his friends would be very faithful people. And so this is a reminder for us, just like Daniel and his friends came from a heritage, it's important for us to make sure that our Christian heritage is passed down to the next generation. And there's some more information here about that, and I'm going to be preaching on that actually this Sunday, which is not only the day before Patriot Day on September 11th, but September 10th is Grandparents' Day. And so the training and the teaching is all about possibly changing them into good Babylonians. Maybe the king wants these young men to attend him as Babylonians. Maybe he's just trying to get a ground zero or ground floor group of people that he lays the foundation for them. But he's going to find out, isn't he, that for Daniel and his friends, the foundation has always been laid, and 3 years of education is not going to fix it. And so the food is laid out there for them. And, it's like, wow, if I get all this wonderful food from the king, it's almost like a very intense bribe, an inducement to follow along in the program. Quite a wonderful benefit, or you might call it a perk, of getting put in this special school. But listen to verses 8 through 13. Daniel determined that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine he drank. So he asked permission from the chief eunuch not to defile himself. Verse 9, God had granted Daniel kindness and compassion from the chief eunuch. Yet he said to Daniel, I fear the Lord the king, who assigned your food and drink. What if he sees your faces looking thinner than the other young men your age? You would endanger my life with the king. So Daniel said to the guard, whom the chief eunuch had assigned to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then examine our appearance and the appearance of the young men who are eating the king's food, and deal with your servants based on what you see. Wow. How do you like that? So Daniel put the brakes on the king's plan right away, setting himself apart and his friends, presumably. I ain't eating that. And it's not that the food is, some terrible thing, but he's defiling himself, he says. Defiling himself with the king's food. Defile carries the idea of being polluted or desecrated. So Daniel, having been raised in a Jewish home, I'm on page 19, would have understood certain foods were not kosher. Certain animals were not clean. And Hebrew law prohibited Jews from eating certain things. We all know this. Now, ancient pagan religions often compelled adherents to leave food before an idol. So after it had been presented to a god, the priest or the leader would consume it. And the law of Moses precludes this, does not allow this. So this is an ongoing issue for the people of God. Even some early Christians face it, 1 Corinthians chapter 8. And so offering food to idols, as you know, continues today. You can see in Thailand or in various Buddhist temples and Hindu temples, even in Greensboro. You can go over to the Hindu temple and you'll see food there as an offering, just sitting there in front of the statue, often oranges and things like that. So Daniel took a hard stand for his religious convictions. He was gracious in his request. He asked permission, but he had already decided he wasn't going to eat the king's food. And so this is a lesson for us. And so here's the great question, and this is a big question. We've all faced this question. How do we distinguish between matters of preference and issues of conviction? What are we convicted about? And how might that be different than merely our preferences? Are we always trying to push our preferences on people, or are we standing by our convictions? And so that is a huge, massive question, and examples here in the Old Testament, and the New Testament has examples of trying to make that decision too. And the question that falls from that in verse 20, how do we navigate the tension between standing in our convictions and not just isolating ourselves from other people? Because, as you know, our tendency is for each person's head to become his own church. Or as some have said, I think it was Thomas Paine said something about my mind is my church. Or Lincoln may have said every person's hat is his own church. Because the only people we actually agree with is ourselves. And that's terrible to be that cut off from others. So there are decisions that need to be made and reasoned out. What is our conviction? What are our principles? What are our core values? And how are they different than our preferences? And of course, God should hold sway in all these things. All right, verses 17 and 19. I thought it said 18. There might be a typo back here somewhere, but yes, there is a typo. But anyway, beginning of verse 17. God gave these 4 young men knowledge and understanding in every kind of literature and wisdom. Daniel also understood visions and dreams of every kind. At the end of the time that the king had said to present them, the chief eunuch presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king interviewed them, and among all of them no one was found equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they began to attend the king. So, what do you think? The story has a happy ending, I suppose, that they began to attend the king. They successfully graduated, and they recognized that God was actively at work even in their situation. And so Daniel affirms God's hand is at work, and the Lord had handed King Jehoiakim of Judah over to Nebuchadnezzar. This occurred when Babylon's king had conquered Jerusalem. God had granted Daniel kindness and compassion from Nebuchadnezzar's chief official, and God gave these 4 young men knowledge and understanding about all kinds of Babylonian literature and wisdom. So their point there is that God is always at work, even in their difficult circumstances. So rather than acquire information, the 4 young men gained insight that was beyond normal human capabilities. God was working with them in a very special way. They embodied and demonstrated what James wrote about centuries later. Now, if any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, and it will be given to him. So God gave Daniel the ability to understand dreams and visions. The Babylonians believed their gods conveyed messages through dreams, and God would use this through Daniel. And remember also, Nebuchadnezzar believed that Babylon's gods were superior to the God of Israel, but Daniel's God-given ability to understand this would be used to prove that God was far better than the gods of Babylon. And then finally, they want us to remember that the boys had found favor and Nebuchadnezzar handpicked them, and that through all of this journey of this school, that these boys had refused to compromise faithfulness to God. The Lord had not abandoned them. He took them from being captives to the throne room. And so Daniel was where God wanted him to be. Well, that's an example for us. Our convictions, not our circumstances, define who we are. And they ask us to make sure that we are careful. They even call us in a text box on page 22 to draw a line in the sand to indicate lines that we will not cross and compromise. And so that's really a very quick look at the challenge of developing strong convictions in order to be sure we know and have confidence in who God has called us to be. Well, I hope this podcast has been a blessing to you. Lord willing, I'll see you this Sunday, September 10th on Grandparents' Day. Have a happy rest of your week.
Thank you for listening. Rolling Roads Baptist Church is located at 2800 Van Story Street in Greensboro, North Carolina, near Four Seasons Town Center and Smith High School. You're invited to join with us this Sunday morning at 11 a.m. as we are growing towards Christ. Find us on Facebook and at rollingroads.org.